Sure. So let's start with your shadow equalities brief, because you will have seen there's been a change in the guidance issued by the government around gender recognition within schools. The government say that they're doing this to take the heat out of the argument. You would agree with that, wouldn't you, that we do need to lessen the temperature when we're talking about this, what is a really sensitive issue for people within the country?
Absolutely. I think that is true. And I think it's good to have released the guidance. Bridget Phillipson had sat on this for far too long, and it's obviously a very difficult issue, and schools and parents needed help navigating it. There are three things that I would say I'm concerned about in the guidance, but to your overarching point, is a good thing that guidance has been released. Yes, I do agree with that. The three issues that I would say that they've taken a different position from us, and I was an education minister in the previous administration when some of this was being looked at, is around parental consent. So that word consent has been taken out, and actually we had seen before examples of young people and children who were being transitioned at school and parents felt like they didn't have a proper say. So I think that word coming out and that lack of recognition that consent from parents is required is concerning. The other area where I think is a worrying change is around pronouns and transitioning of primary school children. I think that's too young, and actually this is again something which you've seen as a change of approach across the Labour government, because there is a trial for puberty blockers which is going forward, and we know in that trial children as young as 8 may be accepted on that trial. We think that's wrong. And lastly, it's around the protection of people who have particular religious beliefs, for example, which means that they aren't able to use preferred pronouns. There was a case that I was working on very recently, which was a nurse who couldn't use a preferred pronoun, actually said that she would use the chosen female name of the transgender patient, but then she was sanctioned and punished by her NHS trust. So we also had protections for teachers or pupils who have religious beliefs who can't use someone's chosen pronouns, but will still treat that person with courtesy and dignity and respect.
OK, so on that last topic, last points there, I suppose there may be some work to do. But as you mentioned at the top, overall, a good thing that the guidance is there. And Baroness Hilary Cass, who, of course, worked on the Cass Review, has welcomed it as well. And as you know, the guidance does state that schools must not initiate any action, that parents must be consulted all the way through. And Baroness Hilary Cass, as well as others commented on this, say that any change will be in exceptionally rare circumstances.
My worry is around primary school children, and although parents are involved in the new guidance, it's not as clear that they should consent. And the risk is that we saw, as I said before, that parents are maybe informed, parents are told, but they are not really given a choice. And when you've got very young children involved, I think it's important to be very clear that parents should be in control. By far the best protective layer that you've got for children, the best way to protect those children is to make sure that parents have a say. So, like I said, these are substantive points, but the overarching view is it's positive they have released the guidance. Like I said, it had taken far too long, and we know that schools and teachers have been struggling with what is a very complex issue. But that being said, our job is to scrutinise, it's to look at the areas that we are worried about, and as I said, those are 3 points where we are going to keep a very careful eye. I wish they'd taken a different approach, but the approach that they've taken as set out is something we're going to keep a very careful look at.
Yeah, and I guess constructive concern for the opposition, exactly your job, as you point out, Claire Coutinho. Thank you for that. Let's move on to another couple of topics. First, I want to talk to you about Sir Jim Ratcliffe and what he had to say earlier in the week, talking about the UK being colonised by migrants. What did you make of that use of language?
I wouldn't have used those terms, and I can understand why some people are offensive, but let me make a broader point, which is whenever people try and talk about immigration, in the same way that we had in the trans issue, actually, lots of people then focus on language, and we have a big debate about the words that are used, and it means that we never really get onto the substantive point. And the substantive point, which I think lots of people in the country feel, is that not only has immigration been too high, but particularly in certain areas, integration has been lacking. And that means that you've got people, for example, who maybe don't speak the language, or they've got very different cultural views. Maybe the attitude to women and girls is very different from what we believe in Britain. And that, to me, is the substantive point. Do people feel like everybody who's come to this country has been well integrated? I don't think they do. And that is what we should be addressing. I understand when people want to have a big conversation about language, but it isn't really the underlying point. The underlying point of why you've seen that public concern around immigration is so high is because of that question around integration. And I think that is a very fair and real challenge the country is facing.
I take your broader point, Claire Coutinho, but you will know that language like that, it's in the same sort of frame as invasion, talking about this country being invaded. It's in the same sort of frame as talking about these fighting-aged males coming here. It kind of lifts the level at which those kind of far-right tropes are acceptable to talk about, which is why the language is so important. And I noticed that you said you wouldn't use that word, but Nigel Farage of Reform hasn't reconciled from it.
But all of those things that you just talked about were questions of language, and we had countless debates about it. And, I've said my position on whether I think that language should have been used. But what we haven't had, I think, as a similar level is a national debate about integration. Do we think that everybody that has come over to this country has been properly integrated? You look at the situation that we saw in the West Midlands, where Jewish fans were banned by the West Midlands police from a local football game because local members of the Muslim community petitioned against Jewish fans being welcomed there. That is a problem of integration, and we should be able to talk about those things. And my concern is that when we simply focus on the language so much, we never get on to the substantive issue, which is whether immigration is working in the way that not only, people who are British in this country want, but that the vast majority of immigrants want as well. If you go and talk to a lot of people within the immigrant community, a lot of them will say, actually, I don't think integration is working well.